It's The World This Week, The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Let's go to New York City. Noor Ibrahim is international news editor at The Daily Beast. How are you? All right, we have trouble connecting with Noor. We'll try to get that connection ASAP. With us as well is documentary filmmaker Paul Moreira on the Franco-German channel Arte. You have coming out In the Name of Law and Order about, well, policing in this age.
Yeah, crowd control and police and how it has changed radically in the last 5 years. Basically, a lot on the Yellow Vests movement in France, but also Black Lives Matter was like a really paradigm shift in the United States.
Welcome back to the show. Welcome back as well to Richard Verly, France correspondent for Swiss news website Blick. How are you?
Fine. Working today on the French riots and the cancellation of the British King visit to Paris.
Now that's the glass half empty. Emma Kate Simons, journalist at Newsweekly magazine Frontières. Riots, they're demonstrations. They're
right, but as usual, there's a lot of violence there. The dérapage, the breakouts. It's really descending. In part, there's some elements of anarchy. So I mean, that's what I've also been looking at in my stories, and the influence of the two extremes on that. Are they really inflaming tensions?
All right, but let's delve into it straight away. By the way, you can listen, like, and subscribe to The World This Week on Facebook, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other fine streaming services. Yeah, first, the personnel in charge of rolling out the red carpet went on strike. Then the unions invited everyone to show up at the Palace of Versailles on Sunday. And finally, protesters on Thursday torched the entrance to Bordeaux City Hall, Bordeaux, where King Charles was due next Tuesday as part of his first state visit abroad as monarch, to visit his hosts on Friday, throwing in the towel and announcing the postponement of that royal trip. The writing was on the wall late Thursday, Richard Verly, when the unions announced that they'd be marching Tuesday. But already people were wondering what the optics would have looked like of a king and a president who's accused of being a Republican monarch dining at the Palace of Versailles in the midst of these pension reform protests.
Yeah, there would have been clearly very difficult moments if King Charles had maintained his venue to Paris. Can you imagine, for example, on Monday morning, they were supposed to lay flowers at the Arc de Triomphe on the Champs-Élysées. So you could imagine that some protester would probably have tried to disrupt that ceremony. Then in the evening, the official dinner was initially supposed to be taking place in Versailles, then apparently moved to Le Louvre, but still, that would have been another occasion for disruption, not talking about Bordeaux. The idea originally was for the King and Camilla to go by train to Bordeaux. So I think that was clearly an impossible task at that time. Now, to be known is whether it's indeed French President Macron who has decided to cancel and count on Buckingham Palace, that's the official version, or whether it was on the British side that they were quite afraid to send King Charles in such a situation. Personally, I do not know the exact truth, but I believe both sides were probably relieved.
Now, it's not the king who decides where he goes on state visits. It's his prime minister. Paul Moreira, there was a lot of political capital invested in this trip. Do the French care if King Charles comes or not?
No, I don't think they care at all. But I think it's good for both of them that he doesn't come, because right now we're in the middle of a micro 1789 moment, French moment, and to have a real king. I mean, the French always say that we have a mocking. A fake king through Macron, and then there will be a real king. And the both meeting in Versailles would have been, in terms of image and of communication, something very heavy to carry for Macron, and therefore for Charles III also.
Instead, his first state visit abroad, Emma Kate Simons, will be to Germany soon. There were those in the Commonwealth that grumbled at the fact that why is he not visiting country that's from the realm rather than visiting France. Of course, we know it's to patch up differences post Brexit. Your thoughts on that?
Yes, I mean, I'm not sure if that many Australians are desperate for King Charles, who is still King of Australia, to come and visit, myself being from the Antipodes. But going back to the point about the cancellation or postponement of his visit here, I think one of the comical and absurd aspects that came out today of this was the rush by the extreme left, La France Insoumise, France Unbowed Party, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is really an ex-Trotskyite revolutionary, coming out and basically claiming credit for the postponement of the visit, and also almost saying that, along with his comrades, that they are responsible for the soon-to-be-coming overthrow of monarchies from France to, because they caricature Macron as a king, to Great Britain. I think this provided an element of absurdity, but underneath that, there's something real, because you can see the inflammatory nature of the language that is just being pushed out across the airwaves, broadcast on mainstream media, and being driven particularly by these extremely eloquent and quite they're demagogues, basically, from the far left, and there's also coming from the far right. So it's a very toxic cocktail, and it's quite dangerous.
Inflammatory language, I guess, in the ear of the beholder. The president appeared to, according to his critics, to have galvanized opposition to his pension reform. Let's go back over what happened this week. First, there was that 11th hour turning of the bill into a vote of no confidence that his government survived Monday by a mere 9 votes in Parliament. Macron then broke his silence on the protests, and in a bid to temper the anger, granted a lunchtime interview on national television Wednesday, but there, no whiff of a hint of a climb down.
I'm not seeking re-election. I can't constitutionally. But between the polls and the short term and the general interest of the country, I chose the general interest of the country. And if it means having to bear unpopularity today, I will bear it.
Paul Moreira, his words on Wednesday, the demonstrators said that they made them even angrier. Why?
Well, basically, I mean, nothing went ahead from their point of view. I mean, it's still, he doesn't want to discuss the fact that the law could be withdrawn or not. So for them, I mean, I think we have to take this movement against the law for retraite as something more, as a symptom of something deeper than just, a law about pension. It's we have gone through a moment where the perception from the French public that there's such a huge gap and divide between the very rich, and we know that after COVID and after all the help that has been given to the super rich, their fortunes have expanded dramatically, and people are still suffering inflation, suffering a very hard moment. So it's like a perfect storm. You have those objective conditions that people experience right now, and there's this law that some people who are real workers, not like people like us that I could work 10 years more than 64. It's not a problem, but there are people who really work in this country, and they
who have
really
hard jobs.
Yeah, real jobs. I've gone through a real job when I was younger, and really I would look at the watch at 9:30 and hope that the day was over. So I believe that a lot of people experience that, and for them, they are mad. They are mad that they are taking 2 years more of their lives, and so there's the conjunction of all those elements that bring a huge level of anger right now. It's true. I mean, it's not only that they're manipulated by the far left or the far right.
But what's
genuine anger?
But I think your point, yes, I agree, there's genuine anger, and there's a real malaise, a crisis of democracy. There's no longer faith in the future and progress. And Olivier Babou from Institut Sapiens, a think tank, was on French television last night talking about a survey showing that only 18% of French people think that in 5 years their life will be better off. In the United States, it's 40%. But in reality, France has one of the most generous social systems in the world and is actually one of the most egalitarian countries in the world. However, people don't feel that. Despite the injection of money from Macron during the COVID crisis, that was really one of the most successful and generous anywhere on the globe, and saved businesses and salaried workers, people don't remember that, and all they see now is, as you say, more effort being asked of them. But you're right, it's no longer about pensions. In fact, it probably never really was. And it's just this terrible mix now with claims of police violence and inflation, interest rates going up.
But there seems to have been a turning point, I'll put it to you, Richard Verly, when the government decided to railroad the bill through with this use of what's called Article 49.3 of the Constitution, turning it into a vote of no confidence.
Exactly, which means that you can have a text, a legislative text, being adopted without a vote, and it is followed up by a vote on the government itself, and in that case, the Macron government, actually Elisabeth Borne government, won by only 9 votes. Well, I would disagree a bit with my colleague. I think you can't say it's a matter of the level of anger in the country. Pension is something very specific. And the reason why people are angry is because in France, the time when you get retired is the time when you start a new life for many people, even those who did not work very hard. I mean, even those, for example, who were clerk in office or who didn't have that difficult factory job, they believe that starting 62 years old, you start a new life. So it's all about what do you do after work when your working time is over. And I think this pension reform could have been, one, better explained, and certainly should have come at another moment. The problem of the timetable is crucial here. Macron decided to come in now with this reform, probably because he's afraid of the rating agency, financial markets looking at the French debt. He decided to push over now, while he should probably have waited a bit, knowing the difficulty that a lot of French people have to make their ends meet in terms of, because of inflation, because of the war.
So is he out of touch?
I believe he's not out of touch with the financial markets, but more out of touch with the French people.
Yeah, but it's been so many years, there have been debates about French pension reforms, and it's true it's not the right time, but it never is. And I think it's true that he probably should have put it to the vote. There was a risk that they would lose the vote. But on the other hand, when will pensions be reformed? People in France retire. But anyway, why are we only talking always in France about when people are retiring, and 15-year-olds are out there talking about their retirement, they've never even had a job? It's everything is sort of turned on its head, but it's about something deeper, obviously.
It's about something deeper. Well, Manhattan traffic could not keep away Noor Ibrahim, international news editor for the Daily Beast. Noor, we were talking at the outset, King Charles having to cancel a state visit. I know Americans and New Yorkers in particular like Emmanuel Macron. What do they think of him now?
I mean, I think, I don't know if everyone would say that they like him. I think the reactions are either, oh, look, he's someone who's very charismatic and charming. But at the same time, there is this impression that that he's a little bit bougie, that he might be a little bit out of touch, that, he's a president for the rich. I think the impression that some younger people have is that the way he presents himself is a little staged and carefully calculated. So I think, yeah, it very much differs between like the younger generations and older generations in terms of their impression of Macron.
Yeah, and now we're heading into this new phase, and we saw it on Thursday. The demonstrations, the largest since the protests began. They were also at times the most violent. Amnesty International denouncing excessive force by riot police. There are 11 internal inquiries by security forces into the violence so far by law enforcement officials. The top human rights watchdog on this continent, the European Council, also singling out France this Friday. At the same time, the Interior Minister denouncing the more than 400 injured in his ranks, including the security forces supervisor in the northern French city of Lille.
The far left wants to attack the Republic. We need to send them a collective message of condemnation. And the instruction now given to police officers is to use a certain amount of force.
To use a certain amount of force, Paul Moreira.
There's been, I mean, I've been working on this topic for 2 years now, and the documentary should be out on Arte pretty soon. There was a huge change in crowd control, in police crowd control in France. I mean, in like 50 years ago, basically you would have demonstrations, trade union demonstrations, going very smoothly, very easily. The cops wouldn't even have their helmets on and anything. And nowadays...
And the trade unions had their own crowd control unit.
They still do.
They still do.
They still do. They still do. But nowadays, the change of the crowd control method makes it that the cops are more and more close to the protest. They almost touch it. It's like a new philosophy of crowd control. It is engineered like that. Supposedly to avoid the black blocs or the cortège de tête, the head of the protest, to have a free rein, to be able to either break or burn something. The problem is that usually street fighters are fast and they're never caught by police. The people who are caught, the people who are at the front line, usually who get smashed, who get hit, are the ones who are not used to street fighting, who don't run away, who are not, fight savvy, let's say. And so what happens basically is that the regular people get beaten up, and we have seen a huge amount of videos on the social networks of people, sometimes aged people, that fall on the ground, get stamped over by police. And basically this method that changed of being in close contact with the demonstration produces non-stop violence.
Richard Verly, we saw with the Yellow Vests movement that, well, first of all, violence paid off at the beginning because they were violent and the government backtracked on a carbon tax. But then the violence also turned in the president's favor. The longer it went on, the less popular the Yellow Vests were. Is violence being used as a tool by the government? Is that the next step to do the same method?
Well, clearly, Macron government would like to see the protesters being distanced from the population. They'd like to see, let's say, normal people to go back to work and not to accept this level of violence. Now, maybe 2 or 3 things. First thing, I believe, unfortunately, violence always takes place in France at some time. Because, as you said, violence pays in France. Don't forget that the Gilets jaunes, the movement kind of ended up, but a lot of money was put in the economy, especially in the manner of subsidies or whatever by Macron at that time. Now it's more difficult because there is no more money left. But financially, violence, got a result. Another remark is we can focus on police violence, and I think it's very fair to say. But I was myself caught yesterday evening, so Thursday evening, at the end of the protest, with a group of street fighters, as you call them, and it is just scary. Let's admit it. And what they are doing...
How many people were they in this group?
There were certainly a group of 20 to 30 people erupting, literally coming out of a street. I was there with my scooter, and they were coming to me, and I realized, at the moment, I did not realize because it was not in the vicinity of the main area of protest, but they had spilled over in the streets. So it's clearly that the police should be careful and should take a certain number of precautions, but we are facing in France and in other countries groups of very violent people, and I believe it's going to increase in the coming days if no political solution is found.
Yeah, and there's also destruction of public property. Burning of kiosks where they sell newspapers in Paris, of bus shelters in other cities, of the front door of the, as you mentioned, of the town hall in Bordeaux, which was apparently linked to the extreme right. And I think, in fact, it's not going to benefit anyone financially in any other way. It actually just plays evidently, finally, into the hands of Marine Le Pen and the extreme right, who are just waiting there to recuperate everything.
And when the Interior Minister is accused of inflammatory language, he's deemed those who protest, there's a Saturday demonstration against the water tanks in the southwest of France. He's deemed them eco-terrorists. You heard that clip of him espousing a certain amount of force.
Okay, no, evidently the Interior Minister, and Interior Ministers have always used relatively tough and inflammatory language. But it is true to say, and I think that it's not a government line, but people do need to distinguish between, and look, the unions have lost control of these protests because when the protests are being led by the unions at the beginning of the day, they're relatively peaceful. And, the things that happen later in the day and in the evening, it's not under the control anymore of the unions. So, I mean, I think...
It's actually you have like the unions, the demonstration, and then you have like say a quarter of the protest that is formed of more radical people who are not framed by any unions, basically
they
because
want to break things.
Basically because most of them belong to an area, a social area where there are no regular jobs.
I don't agree. No, some of them are
bourgeois. There are people who are I don't think so. I don't think so. It's very difficult to know who they are when they have a black baklava. It's difficult to know. But I mean, my theory, but it's that as we know that in France, factories have closed down. I mean, it's a reality. Industry has disappeared. The stronghold of the trade unions were the factories. They are gone. They're gone to China. And nowadays, what do you have? You have, like in places like Picardy, you have places where people don't have had jobs for like 2 generations now. And I was in the Yellow Vest protest. I was filming and talking to people. Many of them were coming from there. And they never had regular jobs. And they were the most enraged people. There's a social reality that explains the violence. It's not only people who are bad or they were born bad. They were born in a social context that made them violent.
The problem, I think, evidently in France, is there's always a justification for necessary violence. There must be a reason. Well, in fact, when people start to smash up public property and potentially set fire to Paris apartments and kill people, well, there's no explanation.
Well, nobody's been killed yet.
No one is
Politically, there is an interesting reality. If you look at the polls, the French are actually living in a contradiction, the French people. On the one hand, they are against the reform, they support the protesters, but on the other hand, they want a strong man or a strong president in power. And some even, I think around 60% in recent polls say that they wouldn't mind to have an authoritarian regime in power in France. So there is this contradiction. There is this contradiction.
Sure. But it's the moment. I mean, all over Europe, you have authoritarian regime. I mean,
it's a stress test for democracy, perhaps. And while Emmanuel Macron escaped the heat at home with a summit in Brussels Thursday and Friday, Israel's prime minister chose London for a getaway.
Mr. Netanyahu, is democracy under threat in Israel?
Did you break the law last night?
Benjamin Netanyahu shrugging off questions over his government's bid to weaken the powers of the judiciary. This one day after his far-right coalition passed a bill that restricts the reasons for removing a prime minister from office. Netanyahu happens to be on trial for corruption, shrugging off the protests that dog him at home and abroad. And there was this Thursday promise that it will all be good.
Tonight, I'm announcing to you, my friends, citizens of Israel, that's enough. I am getting involved. I'm putting aside all other considerations, and for the good of our people, for the good of our country, I will do everything in my power to reach a solution.
I will do everything in my power to reach a solution. Noor Ibrahim, his critics are wondering what that solution is.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that he's gone off the deep end. I think the fact that, you know, him having to helicopter out of places at this point should kind of signal maybe if that's what I need to do, then I shouldn't be leaving in the first place. I think it's showing just a reckless disregard for a situation that's gotten really, really out of hand. in terms of his own army refusing to serve and just basically criticism from all sides, including the heads of state and the world leaders that he's meeting with. The fact that he's trying to just, cover this up, suppress it, act like everything is going just fine right now, he's spiraling out of control. And I think it's quite worrisome to see for a lot of people around the world.
You mentioned the blowback coming from many walks of life inside of Israel. Thursday was a day of high drama. His defense ministers from the same conservative Likud party canceled a press statement. It was thought he would be calling for an end to this judiciary reform. He was summoned by Netanyahu. Israel's army reservists who've joined the protest. It's unprecedented. They've been speaking out like this officer who spoke to the Reuters news agency.
We decided that we cannot serve and support an army that actually functions as an army of a dictatorship.
You were talking about tests for democracy a moment ago, Paul Moreira.
I think Israel has never been in such a danger in its existence, because what justifies Israel is that it's a democracy, and it's one of the exemplar democracies in the region. And if you're heading through an autocracy where the Supreme Court is blown to pieces, and you give the control of Palestinian territories to the very people who have one program, which is annihilate them or get rid of them, deport them. I mean, Ben Gvir, for example, is a guy I've interviewed sometimes, and is
the Home Security Minister. Right.
I mean, I even question his sanity. I mean, I don't even know if he's. I mean, he's really dangerous to give. It's like in France, if you give the education minister to Dieudonné, it doesn't match any kind of decision that is sane. It's a dangerous government, really.
Is it a personal use of power, Richard Verly?
Yes, but unfortunately at the moment Netanyahu benefits from a geopolitical situation that we all know. The Europeans and the Americans are busy with Ukraine, though Joe Biden is putting pressure on Netanyahu, but still he's got to focus on Ukraine, not talking about China. And recently you had this, Saudi Arabia, Iran, new relationship. So that gives Israel a reason to say that they've got to be, let's say, in alert and so on. So I am very pessimistic in our capacity, our meaning European democracies and Western democracy, to influence Netanyahu and Israel at the moment. I think it lies down with the people in Israel. Those protesters that we have seen, are they strong enough today to force him to become more reasonable? That, frankly speaking, I don't know and I cannot measure.
We were asking earlier about whether Emmanuel Macron climbs down. Will Benjamin Netanyahu climb down? Emma Kate Simons.
I'm going to leave it to the experts on exactly what's going on in Israel. I have visited there a couple of times as a journalist, but I think that what we're seeing is the absolute radicalization and polarization that we're seeing in so many other countries around the world. And then also not only the rise of authoritarianism, but also the problem of fake news. And so this is something that we're facing at Frontières newspaper, for example, and to do with Ukraine and Russia. So already Russian bots and trolls are putting out fake covers of Frontières magazine, which means Freethinker in English, and of Newsweek, suggesting that, in fact, the French and the US press are attacking President Zelensky. So it's all and, with this whole deal with China, between Russia and China. So the problem, and it's a big problem in France at the moment with what's going on with the protests and the violence, is how can we verify the news? We have to be alert for the fakes.
Noor Ibrahim, you heard Richard Verly there talking about the limit to the degree to which Israel's allies can pressure the Netanyahu government. How far can Joe Biden go in putting a bit of pressure on Israel?
I mean, it's always a tricky line, but I think another question we need to ask is why is the red line now? I feel like there's this pattern of framing this as something that's come out of nowhere and like, how did it get so bad? The fact is that, if you consider people in the West Bank and Gaza, the democratic rights that they've been deprived of all this time under Bibi, I think it's not right to act like this is a surprising thing. We've always known what he is. We've always known what his character has been. I think right now it's more directly influencing Israelis, but Palestinians have been raising the alarm about this for years. So I think it's just important to question why now? Why now is there more backlash, more widespread protests when we haven't seen that in other instances in the past? Again, it's always a delicate line with the Biden administration, but we have seen some unusual and like promising just points where they confronted issues like the 2005 law that was repealed, basically making it illegal to build new settlements in the West Bank. And when that happened, a diplomat was called to the State Department, and they made it very clear that that's not something that they're condoning. So the U.S. is definitely being a little more aggressive and upfront about what's happening, about directly going against what Bibi is saying, and hopefully that trend continues, because I think the situation is again spiraling pretty quickly there.
All right, Emma Kate Simons there mentioning the story that how Russia wants to frame it. There were no red carpet misfunctions at the Kremlin this week as Vladimir Putin welcomed Xi Jinping for a 3-day state visit, the first by China's president to Moscow since last year's full-scale invasion of Ukraine by Vladimir Putin. Forget international condemnation, forget last week's indictment of Putin by the International Criminal Court.
Facing changes of the world, our times, and history, China and Russia have maintained strategic calm to deal with the greatest changes of the century and promoted the relationship between the two countries to be more mature, stable, and resilient. It has set a model for a new type of major power relationship in the contemporary era.
A model for a new type of major power relationship in the contemporary era. Now, cynics would say that's beautiful, but there wasn't much concrete out of this 3-day state visit, Emma Kate Simons.
No, it's purely symbolic, but it's a win for both sides, and I think it just crystallizes what we're seeing at the moment, which is this building of this anti-Western, and in the case of France, anti-France axis, which is comprised of China, Russia, also Turkey, and Iran. The mullahs this week came out yesterday. They came out and said that France should listen to its protesters. This coming from a regime that gasses, kills, murders, tortures protesters in their thousands. So, I mean, I think that this is what Macron has pointed out in the past. It's a worry for what's going on in France. It makes these kinds of regimes rejoice, whether it's in Beijing or Moscow or elsewhere.
But the West is not, for the time being, Paul Moreira, dismissing Xi Jinping's offer to eventually mediate. He hasn't picked up the phone yet to speak with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky. And we even saw, they talked about this new Power of Siberia natural gas pipeline flowing east from the Arctic all the way down to China. There's already one part of it that's operational. But the second leg, they didn't even finalize that during this week.
Yeah, but this trend towards Asia in Russia, Eurasian project, it's deeply ingrained. It belonged to the far right, space of the Putinist society or the Putinist philosophy or way of seeing politics, is to create an axis with China, since it's impossible to go west nowadays with the war and everything. And it's also, China has been we've been hearing the war drums for a while now. We've been hearing, is there going to be a conflict with China? Or yes or no, Taiwan? We're not sure of what's happening exactly, but we know that something very grave and bad is about to come up, etc. And this has pushed China towards Russia and has helped a lot create this new alliance that, it's true, can be more than bothering for the West.
Russia still, though, represents, Richard Verly, 2% of China's trade.
Yeah. True, and China clearly wants to have a wider access to Russia's natural resources. We all know that. Now, when you come at this specific visit, I think Xi Jinping has a problem. He has a problem because he doesn't know yet who's going to win the war. He would like, probably, the Chinese president to be sure that Putin is going to win this war. And if he was sure that Putin would be the winner, he would behave differently and he would probably go further in terms of project, cooperation, and so on. But he's not sure of that. So he's got to, in the one hand, have a door open to Russia, extend an arm to Russia. But in the meantime, he wants to be the peacemaker and he wants to be the one who brings an end to the conflict. So it's not an easy position for the Chinese president. And I believe the more we go, the more the war continues, the more difficult it will be for China.
Noor Ibrahim.
Yeah, I really disagree with that, the idea that, you know, China actually genuinely wants to be a peacemaker. I think, if anything, what that meeting showed is the exact opposite, because there was nothing of substance said about Ukraine. I think maybe they wanted to present that image initially, but anyone who read the statement from Moscow, from Beijing, could see that there wasn't so much as, you know, one substantive point that they made about Ukraine, about de-escalating, about any of that stuff. So I think that was, you know, the final nail in the coffin of like this facade, really, that that China wanted to play a genuine, sincere role in bringing the conflict to the end. I don't think that was ever part of their intention.
Richard Verly?
No, we'll see. But I still, well, if you want to talk peace, you don't talk about peace with Putin in Moscow. So at the moment, I think the Chinese would like to find an exit road to this war. They are not comfortable with this war. They don't want the war to continue.
It's bad for business?
Exactly. Exactly. It's bad for the economy and it's bad for Xi Jinping himself.
After Britain earlier in the week, by the way, France, the latest country to order its civil servants to remove TikTok from their smartphones. This just 10 days before Emmanuel Macron himself travels to China. TikTok CEO getting a grilling from both Republicans and Democrats in Washington as the U.S. considers a ban on the popular video sharing platform.
As I previously referenced, TikTok spied on American journalists. Can you say with 100% certainty that neither ByteDance nor TikTok employees can target other Americans with similar surveillance techniques?
Chair Rogers, I first of all disagree with the characterization that is spying. It was an internal investigation.
Yes or no? Can you do surveillance of other Americans?
We will protect the U.S. user data and fire it all from all unwanted foreign access. It's a commitment that we've given to the committee.
So is there a particular problem, Paul Moreira, with TikTok, or is it...
I don't know what kind of data they could siphon off from TikTok, like people dancing or eating pizza, and there's nothing important happening in TikTok. But I may be illiterate on this kind of
Emma Kate Simon?
I think the intelligence services in the US and in the Western world are pretty much, and in Europe, they've proven what's happening behind and the way that we are exposed. I mean, it's a fantastic tool. It does seem a bit repressive to ban it and is going to disappoint a lot of teenagers. But when you look at the level of very deliberate espionage coming from Beijing, I mean, forever, but particularly recently using exactly the same kinds of technologies they use to spy on their own population, we have to be extremely wary. And social media is where it's all happening, where the manufacturing of news, where the spread of conspiracy theories is occurring, where democracies are being threatened most, actually.
Yeah,
so
but
it's right for
they're
us
talking
to...
about siphoning off data. What
Well,
kind
just
of
like
data?
we used to talk about Facebook when this whole scandal hit Facebook. I mean, these enormous social media and institutions that are very unregulated, it's good that finally we're actually taking a look at them and seeing what challenge they're posing towards our democracy.
But is it a different code whether you're Chinese or American? TikTok, by the way, is not just any social media. The Economist compiled the amount of time 18 to 24-year-olds in the United States spend on social media. Here you see in the graph, there's TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Snapchat. Look at that. More than 1 hour a day spent on TikTok as of this year, according to that survey. And the numbers, this is 18 to 24-year-olds, by the way. When you're talking about the next age bracket, millennials, the numbers a little bit lower. Yeah, it's 30 minutes instead. But once again, TikTok is tops. Noor Ibrahim, I don't want to, I don't want to be like, in my day, there were complaints, we watched too much television. Are we watching too much TikTok? I guess I'll start there.
I think if they weren't watching TikTok, they'd be watching something else. But one thing that I think, I would definitely assure you is there's a lot of information that you can glean from TikTok, and you'd realize that if you spend like 20 minutes on the app for a few days. The way the algorithm works, it's very easy to just open the app and just get lost and like open your eyes and wow, a whole half hour has gone by.
Is it more
and just how
addictive?
quickly
Is it more
picks up on
addictive
your
than the
interests, your topics?
Is it more addictive than the others?
I think the algorithm, from what I've heard from people that are much more knowledgeable about this stuff than I am, is that the algorithm really works in a kind of a bizarre way where it really feeds you the things that you'd mostly be interested in. And that kind of information is so important, and it definitely can be exploited. So I definitely get those concerns. Just even picking up on the trends that different, younger demographics are interested in, or just a particular person and what they're looking up and the keywords that they're using in their searches. That is very valuable information, and there's definitely space for misuse there. In terms of banning, I think that part of it is tricky because when a company is that big and so popular in the US, just shutting it down altogether can be difficult for a lot of reasons. But at the same time, I don't know how any kind of independent body can make sure 100% that the user data isn't being used improperly or by the Chinese government. And,
so let me ask Richard Verly.
Honestly, the only way to rectify that is with the sale. Sorry, what was that?
Is with the sale, you're saying. Richard Verly, let me ask you, because in China itself, you can't go on TikTok. They have an equivalent of TikTok.
True.
And it's time limited per day for younger people.
True. Well, Paul was wondering what is the amount of data that can be taken off or stolen by TikTok. I think it's not so much a matter of data. It's the matter of the brain of our young people. And that's what the US government is worried about. Are they going to catch the brain of the young generation and influencing the brain of the new generation? And another
or
thing
is it just about money, Richard? Is it because TikTok is taking ad revenue from
probably
the parent companies of Instagram, Facebook, and
probably
all the others?
And the other question is, do you have in TikTok, and that I have no idea, but I guess the US government has studied probably, do you have some type of spyware that can siphon information from other apps and other parts of your phone? So there is a battle going on. Now, question is, why do you forbid civil servants to have TikTok? specifically civil servants, I must say that I'm quite, in case of the French decision, I'd like to see the explanation.
Because they're vulnerable, because of that, basically they can break through and gather like sensitive information.
Well, but if you work for a private company, there are more strategic, very often more strategic information in private companies than in the civil service.
So it might be China bashing?
There is probably part of China bashing.
No, because there's a wider problem. It's the dopamine addictive apps that we have been peddling to the kids for the last, not me, but Silicon Valley has been peddling to the kids for the last 10 years. And it's true, it's a problem. I mean, I did a story about that. You have kids who are totally addicted to, it's new. It's not only TikTok. I mean, if we talk about that, it's not Facebook anymore, but it's Instagram, it's Snapchat. All those apps are addictive.
It's about how you regulate these, which are what they're media behemoths that have been running riot, literally, and whipping up.
But TikTok is not different.
No, I know, but I think it raises the
broader
question.
It is Chinese.
But it's a security question comes in there.
And it's certainly one that we will continue to watch as this battle unfolds. Well, first off, on Capitol Hill. Emma Kate Simons, I want to thank you. I want to thank Richard Verly, Paul Moreira, Noor Ibrahim for being with us from New York City. Thank you for joining us here.
Thank you,
in the world this week.
Merci.